Join our family with one click. Subscribe now because 1,000 subscribers unlocks a surprise gift. She looked at me like I was nothing. Like I was still that quiet 12-year-old girl who used to sit alone at the dinner table while she and my father talked about their day. She smirked at me that morning, right before I walked into the courtroom. She thought she knew who I was. She thought I was just a paperwork clerk, some low-level assistant nobody respected. She had no idea. No idea at all. Because in exactly 4 minutes, a judge was going to walk into that room, look directly at me, and say 2 words that would change everything. "Good morning, Colonel." And in that single moment, my stepmother's entire world would crack open. My name is Sarah Grant. For 15 years, my stepmother, Diane, treated me like an inconvenience. My father married her when I was 10, 2 years after my mother passed away. Diane never hit me, never screamed. Her cruelty was quieter than that. It was the kind that lived in small comments, cold silences, and the constant message that I would never measure up to her own daughter, my stepsister Claire. While Claire got new clothes and vacations, I got hand-me-downs and reminders that I was lucky to be included. When I got into a good college on scholarship, Diane told relatives it was because I needed extra help academically. It wasn't true. I had worked myself half to death for that scholarship. But in her story, I was always the weaker one. So when I joined the military after college, Diane barely blinked. To her, it was just another thing I was doing to get attention. She didn't ask questions. She didn't want to know. And over the years, as I built a career most people would call remarkable, I let her believe whatever she wanted. I stopped correcting her a long time ago. Some people, you learn, will never see you clearly no matter what you show them. So, I simply stopped showing her anything at all. Years passed. I became a JAG officer, part of the legal branch of the military. My job was serious. I prosecuted war crimes cases, some of the most difficult and high-stakes trials most people will never hear about. I worked long nights preparing evidence that could put dangerous men away for the rest of their lives. I earned rank, respect, and a reputation among my peers as someone who never backed down from the truth, no matter how ugly it was. But at family gatherings, none of that mattered. To Diane, I was still the paperwork girl, the daughter who does something with the army, whatever it is. She never asked for details. She never wanted them. It was easier for her to imagine me as small. Then, out of nowhere, life connected us in a way neither of us expected. Claire's husband, a contractor who had done work overseas, became entangled in a serious military legal case. Details around missing funds and mistreatment of local staff during an overseas project had triggered a formal investigation. The case was assigned to military court, and through a twist of fate that felt almost impossible, it was assigned to my office. Diane found out before I did. She showed up at my father's house, furious, insisting that someone must fix this mess. She said the family needed connections, someone who understood how these military courts worked. She looked at me, sitting quietly in the corner, and said the words that would echo in my mind for a long time. "Well, you clearly won't be any help. This needs someone who actually matters in that world." I said nothing that day, not because I had no answer, but because I already knew something Diane didn't. I was the one assigned to review the case. The days that followed were tense. Diane pushed Claire's husband to hire an expensive outside attorney, someone she believed could smooth things over. She made comments about how military law was just a bunch of red tape run by people who love power. She didn't know I was standing right there, holding the actual case file in my hands. Every dismissive word she said about my career, my intelligence, my abilities, she said without hesitation, without a shred of doubt that I could possibly be someone important in that very case. It stung, more than I expected. Not because I needed her approval. I stopped needing that years ago. It stung because even now, faced with a situation involving her own family, she still could not imagine me as anything more than the invisible stepdaughter she had shaped in her mind. The morning of the pretrial hearing arrived. Diane insisted on coming with Claire for support, determined to watch the fancy lawyer she believed would save the day. She walked into the courthouse hallway with her chin high, glancing at me only once. That look, that smirk, as if she already knew how the day would end. "Try to stay out of the way today, Sarah. This is important." I simply nodded and walked past her toward the courtroom doors. Diane took her seat in the gallery, confident and composed. I walked to the front of the room, buttoning my formal uniform jacket, the one with the insignia she never once looked closely at. Claire's expensive attorney shuffled his papers nervously beside his client. Nobody in the gallery understood, yet, who was about to lead the government's side of this case. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and the bailiff called out the traditional announcement. Everyone stood. The judge entered, took his seat, glanced briefly at his files, then lifted his eyes toward me with quiet respect. "Good morning, Colonel." The room went still. I heard the faintest gasp somewhere behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know it came from Diane. For the first time in 15 years, I watched my stepmother's confident expression completely disappear. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Claire turned to her, whispering something urgent, and I could see Diane's hands tighten around her purse. She had spent years dismissing my career as insignificant. She had told friends and family that I worked with paperwork or helped out somewhere in the army. She never bothered to ask what those insignia on my shoulders actually meant. She never once considered that the quiet stepdaughter she overlooked had become one of the most respected legal officers prosecuting serious military cases. Now she understood. The woman standing at the front of that courtroom, the one leading the prosecution against her son-in-law, was not some assistant. I was the officer who had reviewed every piece of evidence in this case. I held the authority to determine how seriously the charges would be pursued.
I want to be clear about something.
This was never about revenge in the way people imagine. I never twisted facts. I never exaggerated evidence to hurt my family. My duty as an officer was to follow the truth, wherever it led, exactly the same way I always had in every case before this one. But the truth, in this case, was not kind to Claire's husband. The evidence showed clear mismanagement of funds and serious violations during his time overseas. I presented every fact plainly, professionally, without emotion, exactly as I was trained to do. And as I spoke, I felt something quiet settle inside me. Not joy at their misfortune, but peace, knowing that for the first time, Diane was seeing me exactly as I truly was. Not the girl she diminished for years, but a woman with integrity, discipline, and purpose far beyond what she ever imagined. By the end of the hearing, the judge ordered formal charges to proceed. Claire's husband would face serious consequences for his actions overseas. It wasn't a moment of triumph for me. It was simply justice, doing what justice is supposed to do. Outside the courthouse, Diane approached me, her earlier arrogance completely gone. Her voice trembled as she asked quietly, "Why didn't you ever tell us what you really do?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I tried a long time ago. You just never wanted to listen." She had no response to that. For the first time in my life, my stepmother didn't have a clever comment or dismissive remark. She simply nodded, turned, and walked away in silence. In the weeks that followed, our family dynamic shifted, slowly but noticeably. Diane began asking real questions about my work. Claire, surprisingly, reached out privately to apologize for years of being swept along in her mother's narrative. My father, who had always sensed the tension but never fully understood its depth, told me quietly one evening how proud he was, admitting he wished he had stood up for me more over the years. Looking back now, I don't feel bitterness toward Diane. I feel something closer to understanding. People often build their opinions of others based on convenience, not truth. It's easier to underestimate someone than to acknowledge you might have been wrong about them for years. But here's what I learned through it all. You don't need someone else's recognition to know your own worth. I didn't work hard, sacrifice comfort, and dedicate my life to justice because I wanted Diane's approval. I did it because it mattered to me. Her finally seeing the truth was never the goal. It was simply the moment the truth became impossible to ignore. If someone in your life has underestimated you, dismissed you, or made you feel small, remember this. The truth about who you are doesn't depend on their opinion. Keep building your life with purpose, with integrity, and with quiet strength. Because one day, whether they're ready or not, the truth always finds its way into the room. And when it does, no smirk, no arrogance, and no assumption will be able to stand against it.